remember exactly where I was the first time I thought about taking my own life. I can't remember when it was, where I was, or what I was actually doing at the time. I do, however, remember how I planned for it to happen. I would simply drive my car at very high speed into a brick wall. And it would all be over. The despair, the anxiety, the helplessness, and it would stop the voice in my head, that voice that when you have a mental illness never shuts up. And sometimes mumbling, often screeching, but always full of contempt, tells you over and over and over again just what a pathetic and pointless human being you are. A voice that whispers to you in the darkness, who tries to seduce you into believing that the world around you would be so much better off without you in it. This is what it's like to live with a mental illness, which I did for a number of years. And during that time, I seemed to lose everything. I lost my health, of course. I lost my career, friends. We lost our beautiful home, most of our money. And it was really, really hard. And I did think about taking my own life. More than once. But I didn't. Instead of becoming a statistic, I became a superhero. I'm so glad that worked. Let me get my YouTube hats up. Ladies, gentlemen, and fellow superheroes, today I'd like to share with you the story of my journey from being diagnosed with mental illness to experiencing stigma, all the way through to embracing empowerment. But this is not just a speech about me, because I know that there might be people sitting in this room today who know what it's like to live with a mental illness. And I certainly know that there are people in every lecture hall, in every faculty, in every building in this university who know what it's like to live with a mental illness. In fact, if we look at the data, we see that in the next 12 months, 1 in 4 people in the UK will be affected by mental illness. 1 in 4. There are 25,000 students in this university alone. That means that in the next year, over 6,000 students within these halls will be trying to navigate their way through university while being affected with mental illness. And that's just students. Because there might also be somebody that you know, somebody in your life, who this morning woke up not to feeling happy and looking forward to the day ahead, but who woke up feeling lost and without hope. And as you listen to the speech, I would ask that you bear that person in mind, because this speech is also about them. And the purpose of my speech is very simple. I'm hoping that by the end we all feel just a wee bit more empowered. Because I really believe that empowerment is the most powerful tool we can use in the fight against stigma. And so I'll be offering up a few ways in which we can bring mental illness and empowerment closer together, and I'll be throwing out some superhero challenges before the end of the speech. But I should just say, this is not a speech about how to beat mental illness. That's way, way above my pay grade. Instead, this is a speech about how you and I can work together to remove the stigma that exists in mental illness. So let's rewind a bit, back to 2002, when life for Lindy Lou was actually quite awesome. I have a really good career as an ambulance paramedic. I've worked my way up to becoming the first female helicopter paramedic in Scotland. I have a lovely family, a beautiful home, and I'm happy and healthy. Then, unfortunately, I experienced bullying and harassment in the workplace, and all of a sudden I found myself suffering with stress. A few months later, I was given a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder, and after a sharp decline in my mental health, I was diagnosed with severe clinical depression. Within a year, I was suffering from anxiety, I was agoraphobic, and I was using alcohol to self-medicate. And suddenly, life was not so good. And this is when I found myself sitting in my car, contemplating driving into a brick wall. But following 2 years of treatment, the fog finally started to lift just a wee bit. And I should pause here and mention my excellent mental health team at Stirling Royal Infirmary, because it was only through their patience, their interventions and their guidance that I was able to even start to try and find myself again. But at one point in my recovery, I found myself going for my first interview since being diagnosed. And it wasn't for anything special, but it would have got me back into the workplace, and much more importantly, it would have nudged me back into the land of the living. But it was a huge deal for me at the time. And I remember being really, really nervous, a bit like before I come on here today. But on the day itself, the interview seemed to be going really well. There was great rapport between me and the interviewer. There's lots of nodding in his part, smiling. His body language was very open and approving. And I started to think, this might just go my way. And then he asked me a question. He said, "Why did you leave your last job?" And I, of course, told the truth. Because I wasn't very well. I was diagnosed with mental illness. And in a split second, I knew I wasn't getting the job. And it wasn't anything he said, because he didn't say a word, but with every fibre of his being, he pulled back from me. He pulled back from me any connection he had with me, and any idea he was toying with of giving me that job. And just like so many times before, whenever I mentioned those words, mental illness, suddenly a barrier of stigma appeared between us. And I think it was John C. Maxwell who said, "People may hear your words, but they'll feel your attitude." And I felt his attitude like a slap in the face. And I went home feeling as if I'd taken one step forward and half a dozen back. And I blamed myself. I was beating myself up for thinking that I was good enough that anybody would want to give me a job. But a few days later, it was obviously still playing in my mind, and I was getting myself dressed. And I grabbed a t-shirt out my drawer and I put it on, and it was a Batman t-shirt that at the time was just a Batman t-shirt. I have absolutely no idea how it came to be in my drawer. But I put it on, and still feeling bruised from what had happened, I looked in the mirror, and without thinking, I said, "Yeah, you're going to treat Batman like that. I mean, would you?" And then I stopped. And into the silence, a voice in my head said, "No, but that's because Batman would never allow it." My Rubicon moment. Because although I didn't fully realise it at the time, that was the moment I became acutely aware of the part I had been playing and allowing myself to be treated differently. Because as I stood there in front of the mirror, my life over the previous 2 years sort of unfolded in front of me. And I was able to see how I had allowed myself to feel weak. I had allowed myself to feel worthless. And I had allowed myself to feel stigmatised. And although I didn't know it at the time, it was also the moment I decided everything would change. Because the truth is, when I'd first looked into the mirror that morning, I'd seen Lindy, who was suffering from depression, who felt like a failure. But when I looked again, I was Batman. And yes, I think I did say the line, "I'm Batman." And from that moment on, I wore my Batman persona and my t-shirt everywhere I went. And guess what? People started treating me differently. Even when I wasn't wearing the t-shirt. Go figure. Just by making that decision to refuse to be treated as any less of a person because of a temporary interruption in my mental well-being changed everything. And from that moment on, I picked myself up, bit by bit, pieced myself back together again, pulled myself up out of the darkness and started challenging stigma wherever I found it. And it's not hard to find. And I would like to just put in a silly wee confession here, because I also persuaded my husband to move into an apartment here in Glasgow at the harbour that had an underground car park, so that I could pretend I was driving into the Batcave. He used to phone me, "Hey sweetheart, you getting along?" "Just approaching the Batcave now." So how do we get people from feeling empty to feeling empowered? Get in the Batcave! No. First of all, to those people whose lives haven't been affected by mental illness, but who want to come on board this campaign and work with us to remove stigma. You will remember back to me talking about the interviewer and how when I mentioned the words mental illness, he pulled back. What I've since come to realise is that there are many illnesses, if not most illnesses, that when somebody shares them with you, they have the power to evoke a very empathic and human response, and that's people leaning. If somebody says, "I've been diagnosed with dementia or heart disease or cancer," people tend to lean in, "Oh, sorry, is there anything I can do to help?" With mental illness, it's often the opposite, and people, through fear, embarrassment, whatever, they pull back. And in fact, when I practiced this speech in front of my college students last week, one of them came and spoke to me afterwards, and he said, "My friend shared with me the other day that's been diagnosed with depression, and now looking back, I realised I did pull back because I was embarrassed and I didn't know how to handle it." So I say this to you, if somebody in your life is brave enough and trusts you enough to share the fact that they're struggling with a mental illness, don't pull back. Lean in. If you can do nothing else, you don't have to make it better, you don't have to have all the answers. Just lean in, and I promise you, that small act of humanness will do more to eradicate stigma than you could possibly know. But to all you superheroes out there who are struggling with a mental illness, remember this, there is always hope. And just because today you might feel as if things can't get any worse, tomorrow is a brand new day. And you might just feel better. And in fact, you can go on and feel better. And dare I even say it, you can go on and feel stronger than you did before. Just a few years after I became Batman, I came to this university to study for my first degree at the age of 41. And I graduated 4 years later with a psychology honours degree. And on a wee side note, 3 days later I married in the university chapel. And when my husband and I said I do, the Batman theme was played on the chapel organ. And they say the sound carried through the cloisters and across the university. There is always hope. But it also means becoming co-conspirators of our own change. It means standing up, taking ownership of where you are, deciding on how you want to be treated by the world, and going out and demanding that treatment. And it means challenging stigma wherever you find it. But it also means not finding reasons to become a victim. I've seen a lot in the media recently about mental health charities who do a wonderful job, but taking steps to censor the language that everyday people use, words like crazy, mad, in case it offends somebody with a mental illness. I would argue that this is not empowering us. I would argue that this is in fact detrimental to our cause, because if people are scared of saying something in case they offend, the conversation will stop. The dialogue will stop between the mental illness camp and those that are trying to help, and we'll be right back to where we started. Just last week at college, one of my students called me a big mad mental muppet. Now, if you live in Glasgow or the west coast of Scotland, that will raise a smile, as it has here, because we actually use that as a term of endearment to each other. But if I was to take those words, mad, mental, muppet, and take the literal translation of those words and apply them to myself as somebody who has had mental health, I could feel very offended. Let's not find offence where offence was never meant in the first place. Instead, let's adopt the mantra, I choose not to offend, and I choose not to be offended. We have enough challenges of our own to face. And talking about challenges, I'd like to throw out a couple of challenges to everybody here. To all you superheroes in the room, watching at home, go out, get yourself a superhero t-shirt, or the one you've already got. Put it on, stand in front of the mirror, take a big deep breath, and remind yourself that you are fighting a battle most people will never understand. And that doesn't make you weak, that makes you a warrior. And that this is no longer just a t-shirt. This is a suit of armour. To all you superhero fans, we ask that you join us on the 26th of June, the day that we're adopting as Superheroes versus Stigma Day, where we're encouraging people from around the world, everybody who's seen this video, that means you have to share it, to wear a superhero t-shirt in support of everybody who's ever had a mental illness. And why the 26th of June? Because that's when Batman had his Rubicon moment. That's the day when Bruce Wayne's parents were taken from him. And that's the day that arguably he became Batman. And I'd just like to end with a quote from Spider-Man 2. It's not all about Batman. I know there are other superheroes out there. Which says, I believe there's a hero in all of us that keeps us honest, gives us strength, and keeps us noble. Well, I believe that too. So I ask everybody to join me in the Superheroes versus Stigma movement, and let's work towards bringing out the hero in every single one of us.